The doors of the grand convocation hall slid open, and every voice inside stopped at once. I walked in wearing armor that should not have still been standing, let alone walking. The chest plate was scorched black on one side. My left shoulder guard had melted and reset into a twisted shape that no longer matched the right. My visor had a crack running from the top corner down to my jaw, and through that crack, hundreds of alien eyes could see the exhaustion on my face. I did not stop walking. I did not look down. I kept my eyes on the raised platform at the far end of the hall, where the 7 high delegates of the Concord sat above everyone else, looking down at the rest of the galaxy, the way a person looks down at insects. The first laugh came from somewhere on my right, then another. Then it spread, the way fire spreads through dry grass, fast and hungry, until the whole hall was filled with the sound of beings from 100 different worlds, laughing at one man in broken armor. I kept walking. A voice rose above the rest, smooth and amused, carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never once been afraid. I turned my head toward it, and found a tall figure standing near the front row, his skin the color of dark blue stone, his robes stitched with silver thread that marked him as a member of the Velkar Dominion, one of the oldest and proudest warrior cultures in the Concord. His name, I would later learn, was Lord Threxen Calor, and he had the kind of smile that had never been told no. "Behold," he said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear, "the great defenders of humanity, sent to address this convocation in scrap metal a child would be ashamed to wear." The laughter grew louder. Somewhere behind me, I heard something that might have been a Drenic war chime, the sound their species made when they found something deeply funny. Even the quieter species, the ones who rarely showed emotion in public, were leaning toward each other, murmuring, amused. I did not feel anger. I had used up all my anger 3 weeks ago, on a burning outpost 40 light-years from this hall, and there had been none left over for this room full of comfortable people in comfortable chairs. I reached the center of the floor and stopped. The chatter slowly faded, replaced by an expectant silence, the kind of silence a crowd gives someone right before they expect to enjoy watching that person fail. Lord Calor was not finished. He stepped forward, his robes sweeping the polished floor, and addressed the high delegates directly, though his words were clearly meant for everyone in the hall to hear. "Honored delegates," he said, "I must ask, is this truly the representative humanity has sent to speak before this convocation? Are we to believe that a species capable of interstellar travel could not afford to repair his equipment before standing in this sacred hall? Or is this," he turned back toward me, his eyes glittering, "simply how humans choose to dress when they wish to be taken seriously?" A new wave of laughter rolled through the chamber. I felt my jaw tighten beneath the cracked visor, but I said nothing. Not yet. One of the high delegates, an elderly being from the Sevreni cloister, with skin like pale silk and eyes that had seen 4 centuries of galactic history, raised a thin hand for silence. The laughter did not stop completely, but it quieted enough for her voice to carry. "Human," she said, her translator giving her words a soft, musical quality. "You stand before the Concord to deliver testimony regarding the destruction of your outpost at the edge of charted space. Before you speak, I must ask you the same question Lord Calor has raised, though perhaps with less mockery in my tone. Your armor appears severely damaged. Was this damage sustained in the incident you are here to report?" "Yes," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected, scraped raw from smoke I had breathed in weeks ago and still hadn't fully cleared from my lungs. "And yet you wear it still," she said, rather than presenting yourself in a clean uniform, as is customary for this hall. I looked at her, then let my eyes pass slowly across the rows of delegates surrounding me, creatures with feathers and scales and skin like polished metal, all of them watching me with the same mixture of curiosity and contempt. "I wear it," I said, "because every one of you needs to see what it looked like to survive." The hall went quiet again, but this time the silence had a different texture to it, less amused, more uncertain. Lord Calor was not ready to let the moment pass. He folded his arms and tilted his head, the picture of polite disbelief. "Survive what, exactly? Forgive me, human, but your species has been part of this Concord for less than a decade. You have fought no wars worth recording. You have faced no enemy that the rest of us have not already faced and defeated a dozen times over. What threat could possibly have left you in such a state, when species far older and far stronger than yours stand here today wearing armor without a single scratch? I almost laughed at that, though nothing about the moment was funny. I thought about the people who were not standing in this hall with me. I thought about the smoke, and the screaming alarms, and the silence that came after. You're right, I said. We've fought no wars worth recording, by your standards. We've only been out here a few years, but 3 weeks ago, something found our outpost on the edge of the Varan Drift, and it did not care how long humanity has been part of your concord. It did not care about treaties or borders or polite introductions. It came in the middle of the night, and within 6 hours, it had turned a station of 400 people into wreckage. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Lord Callor only raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. A tragic story, he said, his tone suggesting he found it anything but tragic. But tragedy does not excuse poor presentation. Surely if this threat was as severe as you claim, your engineers could have repaired your equipment before sending you to address this body. Unless, of course, there was no time to repair it, because there was nothing left worth repairing. A few delegates chuckled at that. I felt the old, familiar tightness building in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. Something that had been sitting quietly inside me since the moment I had pulled the last survivor out of the wreckage and realized there would be no others. The Sevreni delegate leaned forward slightly. Lord Callor raises a fair point, human. If your testimony is to be believed by this convocation, you must offer more than your word. You must offer proof. I have proof, I said quietly. Then present it, she said. Words alone will not move this hall. Not after the impression your appearance has already made. I looked around the chamber one more time, at all the polished armor, the clean robes, the comfortable confidence of beings who had never once had to fight for the next breath they were about to take. Then I looked at Lord Callor, who was watching me with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had already won. You want proof, I said. Fine, I'll give you proof. But once I do, none of you are going to be laughing anymore. I reached up with both hands toward the clasps at my collar, the ones that held the cracked visor in place, and I felt the entire hall lean forward, waiting to see exactly what kind of broken, pitiful thing they expected to find underneath. They had no idea what they were about to see. I let my hands rest on the clasps for a moment, not because I needed to build suspense, but because once this armor came off, there was no putting the truth back inside it. Every person in this hall, every species that had ever doubted humanity, was about to understand exactly what had happened at the edge of the Varan Drift. I thought about Lily Sandoval, who had been on comms duty the night the alarms went off, and who had stayed at her station 14 minutes longer than she should have, just to make sure the evacuation order reached every section of the outpost before the power finally failed. I thought about Owen Pratt, our outpost commander, who had ordered me into this same armor, and told me, in a voice steady despite everything falling apart around us, that someone needed to survive long enough to tell the Concord what was coming. I had promised him I would. The clasps released with a soft click, and the front plate of my armor began to separate. The hall, which only minutes ago had been filled with laughter and mockery, fell into a silence so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the building's environmental systems, the soft rustle of robes as delegates leaned forward in their seats, the quiet, almost nervous breathing of beings who suddenly were not sure they wanted to see what came next. I pulled the chest plate away and let it fall to the floor with a heavy clang that echoed through the chamber. A few gasps rose from the crowd before I had even fully revealed what was underneath, as though the sound of the armor hitting the ground had already told them something important. I did not stop. I reached for the shoulder guards next, the melted one and the intact one, and removed them both, setting them down with far more care than I had given the chest plate, because the shoulder guard had been the last piece of equipment standing between me and a wound that should have ended everything. Lord Callor's confident expression had begun to falter. I noticed it immediately, the way his arms had slowly uncrossed, the way his weight had shifted forward without him seeming to realize it. I removed the gauntlets next, one at a time, and laid them on the floor beside the chest plate. My hands, now bare, were marked with thin white scars crossing the knuckles, scars that had not been there a year ago, before any of this had started. The Sevreni delegate's pale eyes had narrowed, fixed entirely on me now, all trace of polite curiosity, replaced by something far more serious. I reached for the final clasp, the one holding the cracked visor in place over my face, and I paused there for just a moment, looking out at the sea of alien faces watching me, waiting, no longer laughing, no longer amused, no longer certain of anything at all. "You wanted proof," I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "Here it is." I removed the visor. I will not pretend the reaction was instant. For a heartbeat, the hall remained still, processing what they were seeing, the way a mind sometimes needs a moment to catch up with the eyes. Then, one by one, gasps spread outward like ripples on water, soft exclamations in a dozen different languages, the sound of beings realizing all at once that they had badly misjudged the man standing before them. My face was not unscathed. A long scar ran from my left temple down across my cheek, the skin around it still faintly pink, still healing. But it was not the scar that drew their attention. It was what lay beneath my jaw, where the skin gave way to a thin band of dark metal fused directly into the bone, the kind of emergency field repair only used when there was no other choice, when the alternative to the repair was simply not surviving at all. Lord Calor took a small, involuntary step backward. "This," I said, gesturing toward the scar, toward the metal at my jaw, toward the armor lying broken on the floor in front of me, "is what survival looked like. This armor did not fail because we built it poorly. This armor failed because it was hit harder, more times, by something more relentless than any of you have ever faced in your long and comfortable histories. And the only reason I am alive to stand in this hall and let you laugh at me is because 312 people did not survive that night, and every one of them bought me the time I needed to escape." The silence in the hall had become something heavy now, something with real weight to it. "You asked what threat could have left a human in such a state," I continued, turning toward Lord Calor, who no longer looked amused, who no longer looked confident, who looked instead like a man slowly realizing he had laughed at the wrong moment, in front of the wrong person. "I will tell you exactly what it was, and then every species in this Concord is going to understand why I did not have time to polish my armor before I came here." I let the silence stretch a moment longer, long enough for every delegate in the hall to lean forward in their seats, long enough for the weight of what they were about to hear to settle over the room like a held breath. Then I began to tell them what had happened at the edge of the Varen Drift. 3 weeks before, I stood in that hall. The outpost at the Varen Drift was the quietest posting in the entire human sector. We called it Station Hollow, though its official designation was something longer and far less memorable. It sat on the edge of charted space, a refueling and research post with a crew of 400, most of them scientists, engineers, and support staff. Only 40 of us wore uniforms. The rest were there to study a strange cluster of gravitational anomalies that had drawn researchers from 3 different worlds, all of them excited about readings that made no sense according to any known physics. I was one of the 40. My name is Caleb Hartley, and at the time, my biggest concern was a malfunctioning coolant line in the eastern docking bay that kept tripping alarms every 6 hours, for no reason anyone could find. I remember complaining about it to Lily Sandoval over a late dinner in the mess hall, the two of us picking at reheated noodles while she told me, between bites, that the comms array had been picking up strange interference all week, faint signals that did not match any known frequency pattern used by Concord ships or known pirate bands in the region. Neither of us thought much of it. Strange signals were common near the drift. The anomalies messed with everything, from sensor readings to navigation calculations. Our station commander, Owen Pratt, had been with the outpost since it was first established 2 years earlier, and he had a saying he liked to repeat whenever something odd showed up on the scopes. "Out here, weird is just Tuesday." That particular Tuesday, weird turned into something else entirely. It started just after midnight station time, when the outer sensor array picked up a series of small objects entering the system at a speed our tracking systems initially flagged as a sensor error. Nothing, according to our instruments, should have been moving that fast without being torn apart by its own velocity. I was on duty in the control room when the alert came through, and I remember staring at the readout for a full 10 seconds before I understood what I was looking at. There were 41 objects, all moving in a tight formation, all decelerating at a rate that defied every model of propulsion we had ever recorded. I called Commander Pratt immediately. He arrived in the control room less than 2 minutes later, still pulling his jacket on, and took one look at the screen before his expression changed from sleepy irritation to something far more focused. "Get me a visual," he said. It took another 6 minutes for the long-range optical array to lock onto the approaching formation, and when the image finally resolved on the main screen, the entire control room went quiet. The objects were not ships in any shape we recognized. They were long and segmented, dark gray in color, with surfaces that seemed to shift and ripple even when perfectly still, as though the material itself was alive in some way none of us understood. There were no visible weapons, no visible engines, nothing that matched any known vessel design from any species in the Concord database. "Pull up the threat assessment library," Pratt said, his voice steady but quiet. "Cross-reference that hull pattern against anything we have." The system returned nothing. Not a partial match, not a near match, nothing at all. Whatever was approaching our station had never been recorded by any human, Concord, or independent database we had access to. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think it matters. We did not panic immediately. Commander Pratt followed protocol exactly as he had been trained. He ordered a system-wide alert, woke the full security detail, and attempted contact on every standard frequency, requesting the unidentified vessels identify themselves and state their intentions. There was no response. Not silence exactly, but something stranger, a kind of static that our comms officer described as feeling deliberate, as though something on the other end was listening, without choosing to answer. The formation continued its approach without deviation, without acceleration, without any change in behavior at all, moving toward Station Hollow with the patient, unhurried confidence of something that had never once needed to hurry. At 11 minutes past midnight, the lead object in the formation altered its trajectory and began moving directly toward our outer docking ring. Commander Pratt gave the order to seal all external airlocks and move the science staff to the secured inner sections of the station. I remember the sound of the alarms, a steady, rising tone that I had heard 100 times in drills and never once expected to hear for real. I was assigned to the security response team stationed near the eastern docking bay, the same bay with the coolant line that had been giving me trouble for weeks. Looking back, I think that small, annoying malfunction may have saved my life, because it meant I was already in full gear, helmet sealed, weapon checked, standing in the one section of the station that would matter most before the night was finished. The lead object reached the outer hull at 11:19. There was no impact, no explosion, nothing that matched any breach pattern we had trained for. Instead, the hull simply began to change, the metal softening and parting as though it were being dissolved rather than torn, opening a gap large enough for something to pass through without resistance. I will not describe in detail everything that came through that gap, because words struggle to capture it accurately, and because the people who saw it most closely are no longer here to offer their own account. What I can tell you is that it did not move like anything built by intelligent hands. It moved like something grown, something that had never needed armor or weapons because its body served both purposes at once. The first reports came in within 90 seconds. Security personnel near the breach were down, not killed outright in most cases, but disabled, their equipment failing in ways that made no sense, communications cutting out mid-sentence, power systems draining, as though something was pulling the energy directly out of the air around it. Commander Pratt's voice came over the comms, steady despite everything, ordering a full station evacuation and directing all available security personnel to fall back and cover the evacuation routes, rather than engage directly. It was the right call. It was also, I would later learn, a call that meant he had already accepted he was not leaving the station himself. I spent the next several hours in a fight I am still not entirely sure I understood while it was happening. My team held the eastern corridor, the route connecting the science wing to the evacuation shuttles, and we held it because 400 people needed that path to stay open long enough to reach safety. I do not remember every detail clearly. Difficult nights rarely leave clean memories. What I remember are fragments. The sound of my armor's alert system warning me of structural damage. The way the corridor lights flickered every time one of those things passed close enough to drain power from the nearby systems. The voice of a young engineer, named Priya Anand, who I had never met before that night, calling out directions to lost evacuees over an open channel until her own comm finally went silent, partway through a sentence. I remember Lily Sandoval's voice too, calm and clear even as the station fell apart around her, reading off evacuation numbers from the comm station. She refused to leave until every group had been accounted for. She stayed at her post, 14 minutes longer than her own safety allowed. And those 14 minutes were the difference between an evacuation shuttle leaving full and leaving empty. By the time the last shuttle cleared the docking bay, the eastern corridor had taken damage that no engineer could have repaired in time to matter. My armor had absorbed 3 direct strikes that I know of, each one draining power and integrity in ways that shouldn't have been survivable, each one leaving a mark that would later confuse the medical staff who examined me, because nothing in their training explained injuries caused by something that wasn't, technically speaking, a weapon at all. Commander Pratt found me near the end, pulling me back from a section of corridor that had begun to collapse, my own systems failing faster than I could track. He had taken damage of his own by then, the kind that no amount of field medicine was going to fix. I remember him gripping my shoulder, his voice rough but absolutely certain, telling me that someone needed to survive long enough to make it back to Concord space and tell them exactly what had happened here, because if this was happening at the edge of our territory, it was likely happening, or would soon happen, at the edge of everyone else's territory too. I told him I wasn't leaving without him. He told me that wasn't my choice to make, and then he did something I will never be able to properly explain in a way that makes it sound as selfless as it actually was. He used the last working systems of his own armor to seal the corridor behind me as I retreated, buying enough time for me to reach the final evacuation pod before the entire eastern wing lost structural integrity completely. I do not know exactly what happened to him after that. I know the eastern wing did not hold. I know the final tally, once it was confirmed weeks later by automated station logs recovered from the wreckage, came to 312 people who never made it home. I know that I was the only member of the security response team to make it off that station, and I know that for a long time afterward, I struggled to understand why fate had chosen me to be the one who walked away. What I came to understand, eventually, was that surviving wasn't the point. Surviving was only useful because of what came after it. Someone needed to carry the truth of that night back to a galaxy that had no idea what was waiting at its edges, and that responsibility had landed on me whether I felt ready for it or not. My escape pod drifted for 6 hours before a passing Concorde patrol vessel picked up its emergency beacon. I remember very little of that drift, only the silence, and the cold, and the steady, repeating thought that I had to make it back, that I owed it to every person who had not made it onto a shuttle to deliver their story to people who could actually do something about it. The patrol vessel brought me to the nearest Concorde relay station, where I was treated for injuries that the medical staff described, in careful, professional language, as severe but stable. It was there that the thin metal band now fused to my jaw was implanted, an emergency field measure used to stabilize bone fractures that traditional treatment could not fully repair in time. It was there that I learned the full casualty report, station logs transmitted automatically before the final system's failure, confirming what I had already feared, but had not allowed myself to fully accept. And it was there, 3 days after the attack, that a formal request arrived from Concorde Command, summoning the sole survivor of Station Hollow to appear before the full convocation and deliver an official account of the incident. I had not had time to repair my armor. I had not had time to do much of anything beyond keep myself standing upright. I made the journey to the convocation hall wearing the same equipment that had carried me through the worst night of my life, because there had been no opportunity, and frankly no desire, to make myself look presentable for a room full of strangers who had never once had to fight for anything that mattered. I had no idea, walking into that hall, that the very damage I hadn't had time to fix would become the thing everyone noticed first. I had no idea I would be laughed at for wearing the proof of what I had survived. And standing there now, having just removed that armor in front of every delegate in the Concorde, I understood that the story I was about to tell them was going to change far more than just their opinion of humanity. It was going to change how every species in this hall understood the danger waiting beyond their borders. The hall remained silent for a long moment after I finished describing the attack. No one laughed now. No one whispered jokes behind raised hands. Even Lord Calor, who only minutes earlier had been the loudest voice in the room, stood frozen near the front row, his arms no longer crossed, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something closer to concern. The Sevreni delegate was the first to break the silence. Her voice, usually calm and measured, carried a noticeable edge now. You say these objects displayed no conventional weapons, no conventional propulsion, and yet they drained power and disabled equipment simply through proximity. Are you certain this was not a malfunction in your own systems? Forgive my caution, human, but this account describes something unlike anything recorded by Concord forces. I'm certain, I said. I watched my own armor's power core drop by 60% in less than 4 seconds, standing nowhere near an active strike. I watched comm systems fail mid-transmission, with no damage to the hardware. Whatever these things are, they don't fight the way anything in your threat database fights. A new voice spoke up from the second row, belonging to a delegate I did not recognize. A tall, narrow being, with iridescent skin, that shifted color slightly as he spoke, marking him as a member of the Austran Compact, a trade-focused species known throughout the Concord for caution, rather than confrontation. If such a threat exists at the edge of human territory, he said carefully, why has no other species reported similar encounters? The Varan Drift sits near several trade routes, used by multiple Concord members. Surely if this threat were as significant as you describe, others would have noticed something by now. It was a fair question, and I had expected it. I had spent the long, quiet hours of my journey to this hall turning that exact question over in my own mind, trying to understand why something this dangerous could exist so close to established space, without anyone else having encountered it first. I don't have a full answer for that, I admitted, but I have part of one. Before the comms array went down, our system picked up a fragment of a distress signal, not from any human vessel, originating from a sector roughly 8 light-years beyond our outpost. It was garbled, incomplete, but the transmission pattern matched a known Drenic communication protocol. That single sentence changed the entire mood of the hall. A ripple of motion passed through the section reserved for Drenic delegates, 3 insectoid representatives whose chitinous plating clicked softly against each other as they leaned in to confer. One of them, a senior delegate whose name I would later learn was Vec Doran, rose from her seat, her antennae twitching with visible agitation. "This is a serious claim," she said, her translated voice carrying a sharp, clipped quality. "The Drenic Hive has reported no losses in that sector. Our patrol logs show no record of distress activity originating from any Hive vessel within that range. I'm not saying your records are wrong," I said carefully. "I'm saying the signal existed, and it matched your protocol closely enough that our system flagged it automatically, without anyone manually cross-referencing anything. If your patrol logs show nothing, that might mean the vessel that sent it never made it back to report what happened." The hall fell quiet again, but this silence had a different quality than before. Less shocked, more thoughtful, the sound of an entire room beginning to reconsider everything it had assumed only minutes earlier. Lord Calor finally spoke again, though his voice had lost the easy confidence it carried at the start of the session. "Human, I will admit your account is troubling, but troubling stories are not the same as confirmed threats. The Concord cannot reorganize its defenses based on a single survivor's testimony, however dramatic the presentation." His eyes flicked briefly toward the discarded armor still lying on the floor beside me, and for just a moment, something like discomfort crossed his expression before he forced it back into composure. "What evidence beyond your own account can you offer this body?" It was, I had to admit, a reasonable demand. I had anticipated it, and I had come prepared. My armor's onboard systems recorded everything they could before failing, I said. Sensor logs, partial visual capture, structural damage reports. I submitted the full data package to Concord Command upon my arrival at the relay station. It should already be available to this convocation's review committee. The Sevreni delegate exchanged a brief glance with the official seated beside her, a quiet, efficient-looking being whose role, I gathered, involved managing the technical records presented before the body. After a moment, the official nodded and rose, moving toward a control console set into the side of the platform. "The data has been received and partially analyzed," the official confirmed, his voice carrying clearly, despite his smaller stature. "I can confirm that sensor readings recovered from the human's equipment show power drain patterns and structural failure signatures inconsistent with any cataloged weapon system currently recognized by Concord forces." A fresh wave of murmurs spread through the hall. Lord Calor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "There is more," the official continued. glancing down at a data display only he could see. Cross-referencing the recovered sensor data against recent reports filed by independent trade vessels in adjacent sectors, we have identified 3 additional incidents over the past 2 months, involving unexplained vessel losses and unidentified power drain anomalies, none of which were previously connected due to the wide geographic spread of the reports. The hall erupted into overlapping conversation, dozens of voices speaking at once in a dozen different languages, the calm formality of the convocation breaking apart into something closer to genuine alarm. I stood quietly at the center of the floor, letting the moment unfold without interruption, because there was nothing more I needed to say right now. The proof was speaking for itself. The Sevreni delegate raised her hand again, and slowly, reluctantly, the hall settled back into something resembling order. "This changes the nature of this session considerably," she said, her earlier caution replaced by something more serious. "If multiple incidents across separate sectors share common characteristics with the human's account, we may be facing a threat that extends well beyond a single isolated attack." She turned her attention back to me, her pale eyes studying my face, my scars, the metal fused into my jaw, as though seeing me clearly for the first time. "Human, I owe you an apology for the manner in which this session began. It was unbecoming of this body to mock the appearance of a survivor before understanding the nature of what he survived." I appreciated the words, but they did not change much for me. Apologies did not bring back 312 people. Apologies did not undo the 14 minutes Lily Sandoval had spent holding her post, or the choice Owen Pratt had made to seal that corridor behind me, instead of stepping through it himself. "I don't need an apology," I said. "I need this convocation to understand that whatever attacked our outpost is not finished. It moved with too much precision, too much patience, to have been some random encounter. That formation didn't stumble onto Station Hollow by accident. It came looking for something, and based on the other incidents your own records just confirmed, it's still out there looking." Lord Callor had been quiet for a long stretch now, an unusual state for a man who only minutes ago had seemed unable to stop talking. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried none of its earlier mockery. "You believe this threat is, in some sense, intelligent, deliberate." "I believe it's patient," I said. "And patient is worse than aggressive, because patient means it's planning something bigger than a single outpost." A new voice entered the discussion, this one belonging to a delegate from a species I had not yet encountered, a small, four-armed being seated near the back of the hall whose translator carried a deep, resonant quality. "If this threat has been active for at least 2 months across multiple sectors, and has shown the capability to overwhelm a defended outpost with minimal warning, the Concord faces a serious gap in its threat awareness. I would ask the human directly, in your professional assessment, having faced this threat firsthand, what would you recommend this body do in response?" It was the first question anyone in that hall had asked me, as though my opinion actually mattered, rather than as a formality before dismissing it. I took a moment before answering, partly to gather my thoughts, and partly because I wanted every delegate in that room to understand I was not simply reciting talking points handed to me by Concord Command. "First," I said, "every outpost and trade route within range of known incidents needs an immediate alert issued, with full sensor data shared across species lines, so nobody else gets caught off guard the way we did. Second, this convocation needs to stop treating isolated incident reports as separate problems. The Drenic distress signal, the trade vessel losses, the attack on Station Hollow, these are not coincidences. They're pieces of the same picture, and until someone puts them together, this threat is going to keep finding easy targets, because nobody is sharing information fast enough to see the pattern before it's too late." The four-armed delegate nodded slowly. "And third?" I hesitated only briefly before answering. "Third, every species in this hall needs to accept that this is not a human problem. It found us first because we happened to be in its path, but nothing about what I saw suggests it cares about borders, or treaties, or who has been part of this concord the longest. If it's patient enough to study its targets before striking, it's patient enough to come for the rest of you eventually too." The hall absorbed that statement in heavy silence. I watched several delegates exchange uneasy glances, the kind of look shared between people who had just realized a problem they assumed belonged to someone else might soon belong to them as well. Lord Callor straightened slowly, and when he spoke again, His voice carried a tone I had not heard from him before, something closer to genuine consideration than performance. If what you say proves accurate, human, then this convocation owes you more than an apology. It owes you its full attention. He paused, glancing once more at the broken armor lying on the floor, then back at the scars marking my face and jaw. I confess I judged you unfairly when you entered this hall. I saw damaged equipment and assumed incompetence, when I should have recognized survival. I did not respond to that immediately. Forgiveness was not something I felt ready to offer in that moment, not when the cost of his mockery had been measured against the cost of what I had actually lived through. But I also understood that holding on to resentment toward one arrogant delegate would do nothing to help the people who might still be in danger. "You don't owe me anything," I said finally. "You owe the people who might be next. Use whatever resources this Concord has to find out exactly what we're dealing with, before more outposts end up like mine." The Sevreni delegate rose from her seat, her expression now carrying the weight of genuine authority, rather than ceremonial formality. "This convocation will reconvene an emergency session within the next standard rotation to formally address the threat assessment presented today. All available sensor data, incident reports, and survivor testimony will be compiled and distributed across member species immediately. Human Caleb Hartley, your account has fundamentally altered this body's understanding of the danger facing our shared territory, and this Concord extends its formal gratitude for your willingness to deliver that account, however difficult the telling may have been." A murmur of agreement spread through the hall, and for the first time since I had walked through those doors, the sound carried respect rather than amusement. I looked down at the broken pieces of my armor still scattered across the floor, the chest plate, the melted shoulder guard, the cracked visor that had been the first thing this entire room had mocked, only a short while ago. None of it looked impressive now, lying there in pieces, but I understood something standing in that hall that I had not fully understood before. The damage had never been a weakness. It had been the price of every life I had managed to help save, and the proof that whatever this threat was, it could be fought, even if the cost of fighting it was high. The session was far from over. There were still questions to answer, details to confirm, and a galaxy full of species who needed to understand exactly what kind of danger now sat at the edge of their shared territory. But for the first time since I had entered that hall, I felt the weight on my shoulders shift slightly, no longer carried by me alone, but shared by an entire convocation, finally willing to listen.